it's very important to Canberra's history. It's I like to think of the area as the golden mile of 19th century heritage, our rural heritage. So this is predating well before Federation. So to understand the Cumberland Cemetery, as I call it, but it's the Salis family cemetery, you have to go back to James Wright at Lanyon, and he first settled in the early 1830s. So he built a bit of an empire over there, and he did it all with convict labour. And when convict labour ended, tied up with his debts and a global depression, he went under. So he went across the river to Cumberland and formed Cumberland as a squatter. He only stayed for 12 years, and he passed it on to Leopold Fane de Salis, who was 39 years of age at the time in 1841. He dummied up, when the Robertson Land Act came in, he dummied up all of the arable land and river frontage and formed the real Cumberland, which became, over the next 40 years, quite a significant rural property. He had experience with burials during that 40 years of time, and basically, I don't know why, but they lost the homestead twice from it being too close to the river, they learned. And this led up to 1876, and this is where the Mound Cemetery comes in. And it involved a fellow by the name of Rodolph de Salis, and that was Fane's son. And when he died, that was his favourite spot. It's actually the junction of the Gudgeonby and Murrumbidgee rivers, and it's prone to flooding. But the family decided that was where they were going to bury him, and his brother George wrote in his diary at the time, Johnny Noon and Helper commenced the grave at 11 o'clock and worked until dark. They despair of ever getting it deep enough.
And this is because of the very stony nature of the site, isn't it, Dave?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was this particular spot on this junction of the river that they were determined to put him into. So it must have been a very strong wish, and the family was going to carry it out. The entry went on to say, Dybel and Harris helped, and by 2 o'clock in the morning, it is 4 feet deep. The last 3 feet were through solid decomposed granite, and the men had to work with a will to get it done.
This is 18 hours of grave digging, Dave. That gives us an extraordinary picture of the site, doesn't it?
It actually reminded me of he's been actually placed in a granite sarcophagus, is the way I looked at it. And the final comment to the journal entry was, every blow of the pick struck fire.
And that leads to the really interesting construction of the eventual family cemetery, because the decision's taken to raise the whole thing up and form a sort of a mound by bringing soil in.
Was actually decided 2 years after Rodolph, when his mother Charlotte died in 1878. And the family at that time, I presume, must have buried her with Rodolph, and then it was decided to raise the mound by the family over that exact same spot.
Now, do we know how many other members of the family are buried there, Dave?
I think it's about 6, and I think workers on the property's about 11. But don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up on my own blog.
Now, what's happened to the cemetery in recent years with this very spectacular and beautiful natural setting, but all the difficulties that you've described? What's happened in recent years?
In November of 2010, we had some severe weather. I think everybody knows about the floods about that time, and we hadn't seen flooding like that in a long while. But the cemetery had withstood every other rain event before that, up to that date. I had visited the cemetery just before the floods, and I had noted there was wombat holes being dug underneath the section that eventually collapsed. But my belief is the heavy weather has dropped the wall into the loosened foundations, and the continuing heavy weather resulted in the walls peeling slowly away from the area where the original drop was. There's a small collapse on the western wall, and it's the same result. There's the rock
this has been a campaign for you for quite a while now. It's been a cause that you've been really working towards. What are your hopes for the restoration process?
I'm really looking forward to the restoration. I think credit where credit's due. It has been a long process getting this restoration underway, but as it's been pointed out to me, there's been a lot of work put into this. There's been full ground radar surveys. They had to re-identify where all of these graves were positioned, see if the actual records were accurate that were kept about where the burials were. They had to have civil engineers. It's a really difficult site. The rock fall is actually on a steep incline down towards the junction of the river, and I believe a large amount of scaffolding needs to be built for the workers to actually work upon.
But the larger significance of the cemetery beyond the family interest, Dave, I mean, it's well worth this work, isn't it?
When I said a golden heritage mile, I really believe that. You start off at Lanyon, you go through to an 1895 bridge, the first bridge across the Murrumbidgee River, into the village of Tharwa. There's a lovely little old store there if you want to step back a few years and buy a soft drink. There's a wonderful barbecue area the ACT government's established when they refurbished the bridge. It's a short walk, about 400 metres down to a viewing board. You look right straight at the Cumberlong homestead, which is it's not the original homestead, it's washed away twice before this one was built.
The power of the Murrumbidgee, Dave.
The power of the Murrumbidgee. And it's a further 400 metres walk up to the cemetery. There is an access for disabled and the elderly. It's a laneway just near Outward Bound, but I wouldn't recommend that to the general public because it's not designed for it.
Dave, interesting to talk to you about this, and I'm just going to put to air Brett McNamara, to whom I spoke a little bit earlier from TAMS, from Regional Operations and National Parks and Catchments, but thank you very much for your time on this.
Oh, no, you're very welcome, Genevieve. Thank you very much for hearing the history.
Well, glad to know that the work's being done. Thanks, Dave. Good to talk to you.
I'm glad to. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
David Reid, blogger on davesact.com and campaigner for restoration of the Salis Family Cemetery. Brett McNamara is the TAMS Manager of Regional Operations and National Parks.